cemetery, but you left the bodies, didn't you? You son of a bitch, you left the bodies and you only moved the headstones! You only moved the headstones! Lie! Lie!
Shalom Israel, and I'm coming back at you again, talking about, this is part 2 of The Blood of Our Ancestors Are Still Crying Out. And this is documentary on the Hickory Hill Plantation House in southern Illinois. And this place was known as one of the most brutal plantations in America. And it was owned by a man named John Hart Crenshaw and his wife Cena. And this house was constructed in, the construction of this house began in 1834, and around about 1838, it was completed and started up and running. Now, this fellow was interested in salt mining, and he basically grew up working in the salt mines. And this guy was originally from the border of, I think, North South Carolina, and his family ended up moving here. His papa and his family ended up moving to Illinois, not too far from the Saline River, which is in southern Illinois, where this place is located. As a matter of fact, it's about 14 miles east of Harrisburg, Illinois. And this place was known as a reverse Underground Railroad. It was known for, a lot of times tricking slaves into thinking that they were going to an Underground Railroad, and then when they got there, he captured them and either kept them for himself or sold them back to slavery, or even sometimes would ransom them and find out who the slave owner was, and then that slave owner would, of course, have to pay whatever they demanded to get their slave back. And so, man, this man invented devices of wickedness and evil to torture the slaves. And he would force these slaves to work that salt mines. And a lot of times, man, you know them slaves, all of them didn't have shoes. And so could you imagine working in a hot salt mine with no shoes on, and you get a cut, and you start, and not only mention, you start sweating, and you're sweating in salt. So imagine the pain and the agony that our ancestors went through. And this is the stuff that, these Negroes nowadays want to forget about. They don't want to talk about. Everybody's equal. This doesn't matter anymore. It didn't happen to me. When in all actuality, yes, it did happen to you. You could have been one of these slaves back then, and now you've died, and now you've been reincarnated back into your family's bloodline, and now you're on this side and this time, enjoying the comforts of our forefathers and our ancestors' slavery. So yes, you are one of them slaves back then. So for you to say that, slavery doesn't matter, or that was a long time ago, you truly are a fool, and you're a coon, and you've been beguiled by the serpent, the so-called white man. And when the Most High comes to, execute his wrath and judgment, according to Isaiah 66, verse 1, you're going to be put to death. But to get back into this house of horror, even in the slave's death here, after this place was shut down in 1864, it really wasn't shut down. Mr. John Hart Crenshaw sold it. He was injured by a slave, and the incident happened where he was beating a black Hebrew Israelite woman, and he had beat the woman so bad that one of our Hebrew brothers wasn't taking it no more, so he grabbed the axe and cut the damn devil's leg off. And so that maimed John, and he was, after that, wasn't the man that he could be up on his feet watching the slaves, overlooking them on his balcony right here as the arrows point. This is where he would his proud ass would come out and look over the plantation and looking at his slaves working their asses off. And finally, the Most High put it in that brother's spirit, to cut that damn devil's leg off. And so shortly after that, I think in 1864, he sold the house. But popularity had grew so much around this area and surrounding states that people started wanting to come to see the slave house after it had been sold, and they were started charging admission at the door. And even in the early 80s up until 1996, you were able to for a small fee to go in and see this place. And this place was also being notorious for haunting, one of the top 10 haunted houses in the United States. And so, even though the scripture says that they shall consult nothing with the living, see, these were evil angels that the Most High unleashed. Psalms chapter 78, verse 49. He cast upon them fierceness of his anger, wrath, and indignation, and trouble by sending evil angels among them. And also, if you go into the Apocrypha, if you go into Ecclesiastes 39, verse, we'll start at verse 26. The principal things for the whole use of man's life are water, fire, iron, and salt, which Mr. John Crenshaw made a vast fortune off his salt. Flour and wheat, honey, milk, and blood of the grape, and oil and clothing, verse 27. All these things are for good to the godly. So to the sinners, they are turned into evil. See, this lust for power and wealth, which is basically the stamp of the so-called white man's whole existence, especially Mr. Crenshaw being in the salt, as it talks about in verse 26. Now going into verse 27 again, all these things are for good to the godly, so the sinners, they are turned into evil. Now verse 28, there be spirits that are created for vengeance, which in their fury lay on sore strokes. In the time of destruction they pour out their force, and appease the wrath of him that made them. Fire, hail, and famine, and death, and all these things were created for vengeance. Teeth of wild beasts and scorpions, serpents, and the sword, punishing the wicked to destruction. They shall rejoice in his commandment, and they shall be ready upon the earth when need is. And when their time has come, they shall not transgress his word. Now, that's talking about the Most High gives these beasts, animal, and these spirits command to wreak terror and havoc on an area which he sees fit. And that's what he's done to the Crenshaw house. He sent these evil spirits to wreak terror. I mean, there's been men who have spent the night in his house, a group of men, and by the time in the middle of the night, they run out of his house screaming like little women, screaming like girls. Even when people, and it was majority of Edomites coming to visit this place, because they like to revisit their work and the dirty work and the atrocities that they've done. They like to revisit their work. They would go into this place, and there would be they would go in the halls, and there'd be a coldness go over them. They would hear whimpering. They would feel a presence of somebody walking by them. They would feel like they were being grabbed. And a lot of people would just storm out of that place and never come back. But the Most High had done that. See, even in death, and this place is similar to like a big tomb to our people, because a lot of the people were raped, robbed, and murdered out here, and tortured and buried out in this place. They were still making a profit off of our ancestors' death, off the blood of Hebrew slaves. Still making a profit by charging admission at the door to get in this place. See, they have no respect for you blacks, Hispanics, and Native Americans. They don't even look at you as human. They just tolerate you. Now I want to ask you a question. Was civil rights fought for, or was it given to us? It was fought for. Why? Because they didn't like you. They hate your guts. Just like I hate their guts. And you should too. And the Most High even hates them. The scripture says it. Jacob I have loved, Esau I have hated. Romans chapter 9, 13, Hebrews 12, 16, 17, 18. And Malachi 1, 1 through 4. The Most High hates the so-called white man and has very little regard for the other nations. He could care less about them. So I'm going to read a little bit of this article here. And the house was built in the 1830s by a salt mine owner, John Hart Crenshaw. Although slavery was illegal in Illinois, slaves could be bought in from slave states along with indentured servants to work in the mines. Crenshaw allegedly supplemented his mining income by kidnapping free African Americans and was indicted in 1842 for the kidnapping of Maria Adams and her children and selling them on to slave trade, but was acquitted on a technicality. Imagine that. And Trayvon Martin's still trying to get justice, and he was shot down in cold blood by a dumbass rent-a-cop. Now going back into the article, Crenshaw sold the Hickory Hill house in 1864, and it rapidly gained notoriety, opening in the 1920s as a tourist attraction. Visitors reported to the owner that they could hear the tormented cries and rattlings of chains in the attic where the old slaves' quarters were rumored to have been, and the house archived haunted status, attracting ghost hunters and thrill seekers. Over the years, the lines between the fact and fiction have become blurred. There are many stories that could have been attached themselves to the property, but an absence of these written records has made it hard for researchers to ascertain the truth behind the tales. Archaeologist Mark Wagner and his team will be carrying out detailed historic research in order to find evidence to challenge some of the most outlandish claims which have been taken such a strong hold in popular imagination. Hickory Hills is now in the hands of Illinois' Historic Preservation Agency, which is hoping to discover and confirm its history. They have received a grant to carry out archaeologist investigations in the site, and the Center for Archaeology Investigation at Southern Illinois University, Carbondale, which begins work in November 2010. And I'm going to stop right there. But this is just a follow-up video to show you the disrespect and disregard of our ancestors. You know, they can't even, rest in the place they were tormented at and tortured without the so-called white men still trying to make a profit off of them. So with that being said, Yasha Allah, Shalom and this Shabbat. May Yahweh Ba'Shem, Yahweh Shai, bless you, keep you, and preserve you, even until the end of this, our captivity.